Well, there's lots of talented Maori people, obviously, and there's lots of great stories to be told. I think the very first thing I did on film was with Barry Barclay, who was a great Maori filmmaker, and was also a friend of mine back in the 70s. That's before we made Sleeping Dogs, which is my first feature film. But the first real break I had on film was with Barry, a little film called Ashes. I think it was about an hour long. But people like Lee Tamahori and Taika and so on, I mean, these guys are extremely talented, and we're really lucky to have them. Taika is just off to do a big Hollywood film, so I kind of hope that we don't lose him altogether, that he'll continue to come back and tell stories here, because he's an important voice. He's an important voice for Maoridom and for New Zealand in general. And also, while we're at it, a bit of a shout out to the Polynesian filmmakers among us, who have a great deal to contribute.
New Zealand film seems to be a lot more widely accepted now than in the past.
Yeah. Yes, it's funny, isn't it? I did about 20 years ago, I did a film called Cinema of Unease, which has become a bit of a catch cry about New Zealand film. That was before we started making comedies in New Zealand. We were making these rather dark, strange films prior to that. But now we're sort of more comfortable with ourselves. It's quite a shock, you know, when you first see yourselves on film and you hear our accents and the way we go about things. It doesn't look like real movies initially, but we're more comfortable with that. We can. I remember when Once We're Warriors came out. My friend Tioreore Morrison was in it, and I was just talking to some people on the street, and I said, I'm very interested to know why, you know, this is a very dark view of life here. Why is it so popular with Maori audiences? And the response was, because that's us up there. And that's it's very important that we tell our own stories, that we're not just overwhelmed by stuff from Hollywood. The Americans hardly realize what a extraordinary propaganda tool they have in Hollywood, you know, because Hollywood culture in film and television is so dominant, and it's important for us as a sovereign nation that we tell our own stories, that we see ourselves on film, that we hear ourselves on radio, that we otherwise. You know, it was really interesting when we did Sleeping Dogs. We took that we took that film abroad. We had to get the film processed in America because there was no real facilities to process that sort of film here. When it came back, everything looked all kind of brown, and we were very puzzled by that. Why are they sending our film back so brown? The reason for that is no one in California who was grading the colour had ever seen the sort of green we have here, and they've never seen the sky as blue as we have here, and they've certainly never heard people speak like we do. So, but now we're used to that, and we don't have to kind of fake the look of things. We just show it as it is. I think we're probably more comfortable with ourselves than we used to be. I don't know.
Well, you've been around the block in terms of movies.
Yeah.
What drew you into movies, and what inspired you to act?
Well, look, it's much it's much kind of easier for people now, in a sense. Look, when I started working internationally in films, I had no map. There was no one who'd sort of done it before from New Zealand. So I was kind of at sea, really. I ended up in England. It was really doing Sleeping Dogs with Roger Donaldson that was my first break into films. I was actually working for the New Zealand National Film Institute prior to that. But it hadn't occurred to me, first of all, that I'd be able to make a living as an actor, or that I'd be able to make a living as an actor on film. Because there were very few professional actors in New Zealand in those days. There was no drama school, so I've never been taught how to act. I've just had to work it out for myself. And having done that, eventually I found myself in Australia working on films like so many other New Zealanders who end up in Australia. And then I did a few films in Australia, and that led me to working mainly in Europe and in the UK. So it wasn't really something that I planned to do. I knew I knew I was sort of an okay actor. I didn't know whether I was a very good actor. But I knew I had a bit of potential. But it wasn't really until I got to Australia that anyone ever said to me, you know what, you're really good. And it took me by surprise, because I don't know if we're different now, but in those days we were never very good at being complimentary to each other. And it's something, and I always make a point of doing with young actors here. I've shaken them by the hand and say, you know what, you're really good. Because no one ever did that to me. And it took me by surprise, and I thought, well, maybe I could be okay. So I do encourage all of us to be encouraging to others. I think it's very important.
You just mentioned how you acknowledge the young actors, and especially those from here, and you worked with a young girl from Hicks Bay, Tioreore Ngatai-Melbourne, in a recent film.
Yeah.
And there's nothing we like more than hearing about how good our young people are. So how did you find her?
Well, first of all, she's a delightful kid, and I liked her very much. And she's really great in the film. She's very funny, and I think people really like seeing it. One of the things that Taika does in this film, he makes lots of references to New Zealand stuff. So when in Tioreore's scene, when she's talking to Julian Dennison, who's the young kid that I play opposite in the film. It goes fuzzy at one point, and her hair goes also like it's in the wind. And I think that's a reference to a Cadbury commercial that you might remember. No, she's good. She's really good in it. She plays Julian's love interest, really, I guess.
Well, I think I've taken up enough of your time. Our 10 minutes is stretched into 18 now. That's Ngati Porou time for you. Thank you very much for joining us in the studio.
Thanks very much for having me. And what a nice surprise to find a radio station here at the beginning of the world. Hi, I'm Sam Neill, and you're listening to the best radio station at the beginning of the world, Radio Ngati Porou.